welcome to this webinar, where we're going to take a look at the wireless infrastructure strategy, which was published a couple of months ago. Just as introductions to myself, I'm Andrew Muir from FarrPoint. We have a great panel joining us, which I'll introduce in a moment. But first, just some housekeeping, so we could get that next slide. Thank you very much. The session will be recorded, so just be aware of that. Please keep your cameras and mics off, apart from the panelists, of course. Hopefully we'll get some Q&A time later in the session, so please use the chat box for that. And top tip for Zoom, if you use the gallery view, I think that's probably the best view you'll get of the panelists. So onto our panel for today. As I said, I'm Andrew Muir from FarrPoint. So we have Colin Wood from Dorset Council and one of the Ericsson 5G trailblazers. We have Sarah Einan from Scottish Futures Trust, Adam Butcham from the Welsh Government, and Martin Gillespie from Northern Ireland. So a great representation from across the UK. We did also have Simon Saunders on the panel, but unfortunately had to pull out. So let me stop the slide sharing. Good stuff. And then we've got our panel. So good stuff. So what I was going to do is ask each of the panel members to make an introduction, say who you are, what your role is in your organization, and then give us your initial thoughts on the strategy. Before you do that, I'll maybe kick off by saying I thought overall it was a good document. There's a lot in it. I think the rural challenge and the 2030 ambition for coverage is going to be a hard one. Good stuff about better coverage data. I think we all agree that we could do with some more accuracy around coverage and capacity data. Notice that it didn't shy away from recognizing that the benefits aren't yet clear, and so there's more work to be done in that area. Intro, name, organization, and your thoughts on the strategy.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Adam Butcher. I lead on telecommunications policy for the Welsh Government, so that is mobile and broadband. Views on the strategy, I would agree with what Andrew said, particularly around the rural challenge and the target. It's ambitious. I think the devil's going to be in the detail about how it will be delivered, as with all strategies. But yeah, so the bit that's are interesting to Wales, I guess, or interesting to me at least, is the rural challenge and how they're going to get that population coverage.
Mm-hmm. Good, thanks. And Colin?
Hi everyone, yeah, Colin Wood. I lead on 5G and mobile for Dorset Council, which is a large unitary authority in the southwest of England. In terms of the strategy, we were involved in the initial call for evidence. Really pleased that we can see sort of lots of the things that we fed in reflected in the final document. I think the document's really good. I think it's that rarest of things. It's a strategy that achieves that sweet spot between a policy framework and some practical proposals backed by stretching targets to achieve sort of real change over a really defined timescale. So like, for the most ardent policy wonk to those wanting, like me, to see action on the ground, I suspect there's something in here for everybody. And I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Yeah,
good stuff. Thanks, Colin. Martin?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Gillespie. I work for the Department for Economy in Northern Ireland, and specifically in the telecoms division. So we have sort of two streams of work in our telecoms division here. We have fixed line, who deal with project-based stuff like our Stratum or Project Gigabit. And then pretty much everything else falls to my side of the house, the strategic affairs side. So I deal a lot with mobile connectivity. I've developed the mobile action plan for Northern Ireland, and I'm now coordinating the barrier busting task force for Northern Ireland. Coming across to the strategy, yeah, I'd echo the other guys' thoughts there. It is something we've been looking forward to. I think it needed a strategy to give it impetus in this end of the field. I think fixed lines been sort of not taken care of, but is well on the way of being taken care of. I think it's extremely ambitious with their targets, but again, I maybe think they have to be. So if we don't get the whole way there, we make it 3/4 of the way there, and that'll probably be very good. Like Adam, Northern Ireland's got a lot of rural areas which traditionally haven't been sort of very attractive for mobile rollout. So I'm keen to see how the strategy addresses that.
Good, thanks, Martin. And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Einan. I'm Programme Director for Digital Connectivity at Scottish Futures Trust. Scottish Futures Trust is a Scottish Government funded body where we support central and local government in the design, procurement, finance and delivery of infrastructure projects. We've been working with Scottish Government in terms of the delivery of the Scotland 4G infill programme. We're delivering 55 masts across Scotland, involved in the design and delivery of that. The establishment of the Scotland 5G Centre to be putting Scotland at the forefront of 5G acceleration and promoting Scotland as an investment destination. And we also, as well as on the mobile side, we also support in design delivery of the international connectivity and data centre side. So we really look at the kind of end-to-end nature of connectivity and its impact on Scotland and what can be done to address Scotland's needs and challenges. And in relation to the strategy, I would say it's actually got a lot of kind of delivery plan elements to me. I think it's actually got a lot of really key strategic themes, which I think we'd like to bring out in the discussion today. So one of those is about the convergence of technologies. I think it's a wireless strategy. It mentions fibre, it mentions many different things and the importance, but actually I think it's the first time I've seen more of that coming together of different options of connectivity. How do we look at the need and then look at the range of options to deliver on that need? Now, that's partly because that's where the sector is. There is that natural convergence that's happening in the market, whether it's for business model purposes or because the technology is allowing that and the recognition that the applications need that as well. But I think again, it's the first time I've seen that in a kind of UK government document. So really pleased to see all those different technology options being mentioned in there. Another theme that I think is there, but maybe it needs to be highlighted, is the need for more trust as well, and the recognition of trust in the role of particular things like public sector use of these technologies. So it does mention about having secure protocols, about trusting the technology, the providers, but I think we also need to be trusting the benefit and what that's going to be delivered. So obviously in the document it has about applications and use cases, but again I think that's a theme that you can see in different parts of it, but it's a one that we're starting to, it needs to be recognised and see how its role plays in the deployment and the future of rollout in the UK. I think we're moving away from a one-size-fits-all, but there are still elements in there, and I think this is where particularly the provision of data is key. But again, there's some interesting questions there about who gets that data and the frequency and how it's going to be used. Because I think going back to the one-size-fits-all, there are many, we've obviously got some from my panel colleagues here, people who know on the ground about the local challenges, and data is really key to that, to be seeing what is needed and what of those technology options are suitable and applicable to address those local and national challenges. But as I say, I think it's it is a positive step forward for starting to bring out some of those higher level issues, not just what's going to happen on the ground and what is the delivery plan, because they're really fundamental to actually making that delivery plan work.
Thanks, Ada. That's really good. Lots of good points there, which I think will come to as we go through the discussion. That was really good. So what I was going to do is just put out a few topics and from the strategy, and then just get the discussion going around them. And the first one I wanted to look at was around this 2030 ambition. So it's just to remind people, it's a target for, well, part of the ambition is a target for nationwide coverage of standalone 5G to all populated areas by 2030, including villages and rural communities. So there's quite an ambition, especially given our experience today of 5G non-standalone in rural communities. But, we've got, 6-7 years to go. What do you make of that ambition? And I guess taking up as well from Sarah's points about about, you know, this is again, I suppose, a bit like a coverage ambition, getting a number, you know, getting a percentage coverage, and if we get that, tick in the box, it's done. But maybe there's more to it than that. Is that ambition the right thing to be looking at? And if it is, how would we get there, and what could we do to, I guess, improve the economics of the rollout in rural areas? There's a whole bunch of stuff in there, but just around that 2030 ambition and these targets. Maybe I'll come to Sarah. You've just spoken there, so I'll come to you, Colin. Maybe kick off on that and your thoughts on that.
Yep, great. So I think it's a great aspiration. I think no one can accuse the government of not setting stretch targets in this area. And obviously people in rural areas like where I am, they're desperate for better mobile coverage. So that's the kind of context. Perhaps on the downside, I do worry that to many residents, a population-based target around 5G standalone could mean very little. The reason for that is historically places like rural Dorset have, I won't say been let down by definitions like populated areas. So suddenly populated becomes places with quite a few people in them, and then loads of people in them, and eventually end up being cities and big towns. So, you know, what we've got here and now, before we start talking about the future, is many rural communities with kind of limited or no coverage at all from previous generations of cellular. So outside of people's homes and workplaces where often they have Wi-Fi, they can't do something like make a phone call or participate in online banking because you can't receive a text for two-factor authentication. So you know, that's the situation we have at the moment, and there's a lot of concern, certainly where I am and what businesses and communities I talk to. They worry that when 2G and 3G networks get switched off, this situation could get even worse. The digital divide could get even wider. So coming back to your question about the economics, in terms of economics for rural rollout, I think we just need to stop falling into the trap of thinking about population equaling revenue. So we've got to provide network coverage and kind of as importantly, capacity on the network, where people travel, where they socialize, where they spend their money, as well as where they live. Because where they live, they tend to have connectivity. And that means kind of covering the road networks, the rail networks, beachfronts, all the places that I personally struggle to make a connection when I'm out and about. Beyond that, if the strategy is about using wireless technologies to drive economic growth, and it seems to be from the strategy across the whole of the UK, I think we've got to think beyond population and individuals' handsets and consider how we enable high value, critically important use cases such as sustainable transport, food production, environmental protection. So kind of I would argue that 5G standalone is more important to the likes of connected autonomous transport than it is, you know, military training, offshore wind, agricultural robotics. These are all activities that happen in areas of kind of low or no population, and they're more important than streaming videos for entertainment, in my view. So again, back to the question, how might we deliver that 5G standalone everywhere? I think it's going to be massively challenging, but operators do have their full spectrum allocation across rural areas, and our experience suggests that they won't deploy that spectrum in rural locations. So spectrum sharing through local access licensing probably makes that possible for others to come in and do that and build infrastructure that could support these kind of multiple public sector and industrial use cases. So clearly private 5G networks have a huge part to play in that. So kind of in summary, we've been sold 5G standalone as the kind of internet of everything. Let's make it so. Let's do that, but it has to be including rural areas, I think.
Yeah, so that's interesting, Colin. And I guess a couple of points from that. Yeah, the non-standalone nature of 5G, you would think would be targeting some more specific use cases, which is a bit different just to the widespread coverage ability for people with mobile broadband and so on. So it's maybe about, you know, is it that it's a percentage coverage target that's the right thing for it. And I suppose also the other point to take from that is that I guess we're all kind of or we have in our mind, we're picturing the MNOs as being, you know, the lead in all of this, but perhaps, you know, there are a lot more players in it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Adam?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Colin said. I mean, the ambition's ambitious. I think the definition of populated area, I think somebody's put in the comment about what populated area means. In Wales, we probably have a slightly different population distribution. We don't have those nuclear settlements like villages that are close together, like maybe they do where I come from in Wiltshire. Originally from Wiltshire, so and we've got a more dispersed population. So how's that population? You know, what's going to be counted as populated area, and what isn't? What is that for 5G standalone coverage going to look like? You know, in terms of speed, reliability, the spectrum use, coverage capacity is an issue in that, you know, you could cover it, but will it really provide that 5G standalone experience, or is it just going to be coverage for coverage? Is an issue in terms of the economies and making it more viable. I mean, Martin's already mentioned barrier busting task force. We have completed our barrier busting task force, looking at a lot of this stuff all around planning, around things like street works, communications, regulation. So there's a lot of things there that can help make that case and help make it go further. I think that's difficult stuff. Some of it's, you know, oh, we'll build a higher mast. Yeah, but is that going to solve the problem, or is there something else? What's in that sort of those requests? I think, you know, there's other issues for rural, like power and backhaul and all those other things. How are they going to get this out into rural areas? And I think outside of rural areas and urban areas, it's going to be back to capacity and what are the use cases going to be and what the use case is going to be in rural areas. So there's lots of stuff tied up in trying to make the economies are based around the use case, but it's that chicken and egg that they mentioned in the strategy, isn't it? Is that what comes first? So I think, yeah, what will 5G standalone look like in a rural area is going to be an interesting question, because, you know, we've got quite a focus on agri-tech. You know, is that going to help? Or, you know, we're doing a lot of work at the moment around LPWAN, so a lot of LoRaWAN we're using in Wales. You know, we're sticking it on trees, we're sticking it in rivers. You know, it's footfall in urban centres. So there are other technologies as well. Yeah. So there's quite a bit there. Sorry, a bit of a ramble, but yeah, that's brain dump.
Yeah, good, Adam. Thank you. Martin, can come to you.
I'll maybe make Adam's ramble look pretty coherent with my sort of mutterings now. No, fully agree. It's a very ambitious target to set. I think it has to be, because anything lower and it becomes very diluted very quickly. Here in Northern Ireland, I feel, you know, it's going to have to be something like a government intervention that if they are serious about getting it. So something similar to the SRN, the Shared Rural Network, where they'll have to maybe just push that on again to this. Traditionally, like, Northern Ireland isn't attractive to a lot of the mobile network operators, simply because it's a very dispersed population. They're not getting much bang for their buck, where they can go to other places in the UK and sort of, you know, take the low-hanging fruit and make sort of their investments go a lot further. In terms of positioning themselves, and I know we're going to talk about what we're going to be doing later on, because Northern Ireland's sort of traditionally quite behind Wales, Scotland, and England. We're probably nicely situated, because I say we've just published our mobile action plan. Our barrier busting task force is just literally starting out with the work streams. And I won't say too much, because I know there's maybe a topic coming up a bit later on. Andrew, so we're well positioned, and in the sort of frame of mind where we're trying to sort of get out the good news stories about what this stuff can do. I think there's a real gap there that needs addressed. I think the education piece here is going to be key, as much as sort of the money put in, because I think once people start to realize maybe some of the benefits, and again, we're agri-tech in certain parts of the world, we're advanced manufacturing in other parts of the world, we'll have to, well, the government and the MNOs will have to sell specific products to specific areas in Northern Ireland, because we've got, even our cities wouldn't be described as much as cities in terms of the rest of Great Britain. So we'll have to bespoke the messaging around, you know, what this stuff can do. And I think once the chicken and egg was mentioned there, I think once people realize, hang on, here's what we can do with this, it'll grow organically after that. I think that business first is probably the way to do it. And certainly that's the way we're thinking here, where the investment will come from business once they see the good stuff, and the byproduct might be that, you know, general citizens can sort of avail of a rising tide lifts in all boats there. But I say I'm very keen to promote that. I'm happy that it is an ambitious target, but I think it's going to be difficult to achieve. Okay,
good. Thanks, Martin. And yeah, and as you say, we'll come on to just some of the specific actions, I guess, that are suggested about public bodies in a wee bit later. But Sarah?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen, as ever, the technology is there. We've just had Vodafone announce like a consumer products on its own standalone networks, so it's there and it can be done. We've seen the clear signals from Three and Vodafone as well about their intention with the potential merger to be investing in standalone. So I think that the intention is there. The question is, where will it be? And I think beyond the cities, it will be a really challenging space for that business model to stack up. There are things that are happening just now that could assist with that, and I think it puts the emphasis on now. So obviously there's the core network, but they need to have masts that are going to be out there and locations to be putting that those 5G radios. And this is, Martin mentioned SRN, and that is critical. So one of my colleagues, they always likes to say, local 4G services don't guarantee 5G, but they will really help it, and you won't be getting, you need 5G. I need 4G to get 5G, really. And looking at, as we see things moving more to, and I suppose, the split between the asset side or the passive side and the active side of the market, and who's owning which part, having those masts through SRN in those locations will be a factor which will be in the consideration of the MNOs when they're looking at their business cases for where does that further standalone network go. So I suppose just making that push and the importance for SRN. On the other side, there's also been investment, I think, as again was mentioned, in the private network side, and that's where the space has had to have been, really, to get some of those demonstrations of 5G in the business sector. So that's investment's been made by businesses themselves. Scottish Government has invested through the Scotland 5G Centre in the Connect hubs as well, across currently 6 hubs across Scotland to demonstrate 5G in those private networks. The question then is, how do you pull in that investment that's happening on the private network side into that standalone as well? Because one size does not fit all, and there might be different ways that has to be looked at to achieve some of these ambitions. And I think that kind of links back into Colin's point about, it's not about where the people are, it's about where the activities are happening and the businesses are utilising the 5G. So I think there's going to be different ways that this is looked at, and again, some of the things that we're doing now are the bedrocks and the foundations for actually building out that standalone network.
No, that's a good point, Sarah, just around that. Yeah, get the infrastructure, the 4G infrastructure in place as a stepping stone, at least, and then it kind of, I suppose, it kind of opens up the whole area around planning and education and in that area too. Which maybe kind of moves on to the next point, which was in relation to demand for 5G. So the strategy recognizes that there's uncertainty, and many businesses and local authorities don't yet understand the benefits of 5G. And this is a suggestion that local bodies can play their part in helping to identify and aggregate the demand in their areas, both commercial and public sector demand, to help build a business case. So I guess my question is, what role do you think local authorities and other public bodies should have to help achieve that ambition? So around this kind of, I guess, raising awareness, trying to grow the demand for 5G. Adam, maybe come to you first on that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think local authorities are really quite well placed to drive some of this, or either at local authority or regional level. In Wales, we've got four city or growth deal regions, and we've got good work going on across those on digital, and those regions, I think, are quite well placed as well to pull this together to make those connections across, not just within a local authority, because some of our local authorities are quite small in geographic area, but across those local authorities. to work with industry, to work with academia, to work with the public sector in delivering, you know, for if that's industry, whether that's 5G standalone via a private network in a factory, whether that's for public sector, whether that's for connectivity for care workers or health workers or council workers who are out and about delivering services, so they're connected back to the office. So I think they're well placed to do that and to pull that together. I think there are some really good people that already know about this stuff across our local authorities and regions. But there's probably an education point as well for officers and elected members, just to demonstrate the art of the possible with 5G standalone, as in it isn't just about the thing in your hand, even though that make that better. It's about, you know, the value it can add in terms of delivering public services or industry or whatever. So there is a role there, and I think local authorities and particularly regions in Wales are well placed doing that. And actually, they're doing some of this anyway. So I think they're a bit of an open door there.
Okay, thanks. Martin?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think they're perfectly positioned. So I mentioned that we've just literally started the Northern Barrier Busting Task Force here. Northern Ireland's very different to the rest of Great Britain, where our local councils don't actually have autonomy over a lot of this stuff. In Northern Ireland, it's pretty much just the approval, the assessment and approval of the planning applications. So central government holds the reins in planning legislation. Our public assets are pretty much owned by different departments. So one key thing that we have to get is all the right players at the table, all put in the same direction. And we've got that with the Northern Ireland Barrier Busting Task Force. So there's three real streams, and I'll not bore you with the other two, but it's planning, it's public assets, and it's communication/education. And that drive here, I think, as I say, we've hit this more by fluke than design, where this is sort of coming perfectly timed for us, where we're developing a communications and education piece. And to be fundamental, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. What's good about this? Who can we talk to in certain areas that you understand that there's real benefits here? And we're going to really rely on industry to come in and say, and I think Sarah mentioned it, you know, private network, here's what it can deliver. Let's roll that out onto a wider scale. Let's roll that onto a whole sort of region, if can be, to develop some sort of stuff. The other stuff, the perceived bad. You know, if you want this stuff in your areas, you're going to have to approve plan applications, and you're going to have to convince people that this is going to be of benefit to others. So, and then the ugly, that we just try and remove people's real concerns about this. So we recently in Northern Ireland, I've mentioned to Andrew before the conference here, we've had a spate of attacks on some infrastructure. And although people are concerned and we have to take those into account, I think it's because we're slightly behind the rest of Great Britain in this rollout, that we're getting a wee more of the angst at the minute than you guys have probably had previously. And it's our job then to try and just remove that fear, because removing those fears and indeed investigating fears, we're practical to find out, you know, if there is something we need to look at, that's grand. We're agnostic, and you know, whether people's concerns are good, bad, or indifferent. So we have to take in people's considerations. But like Adam, we've got 4 sort of city and growth deals in Northern Ireland, with a lot of people sort of tilting towards these sort of pillars, digital infrastructure pillars. And I think there's a real benefit, coupled with our Northern Ireland Barrier Busting Task Force communication and education stream, that we can play a real part here. We just seem to think, I think that the key thing will be that getting everyone to put in the same direction, that including UK government here. Obviously this is reserved matter, so we need their sort of, you know, their drive and their sort of support behind us to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. But also, if there is going to be intervention here, that they're on the same page with everyone else. We can't promise people that this is all going to happen by 2020, 30, and then if there's change of government next year, that this is maybe, you know, priority 2, priority 3. So I think we need to be looking sort of at realistically what way this is going to be delivered, because if we give good news and we don't deliver on it, well, it's pointless.
That's quite interesting, Martin. Then I would imagine that that's got real benefits, the fact that that barrier busting is done at that kind of central level, if you like, and it's not dispersed down. I could see that that's got more potential for focus and drive around it, would you say?
It has. I mean, the key thing with Northern Ireland, so for people who don't know, Northern Ireland has a 5-party government coalition. So if you can imagine the Tories, Labour, SNP, the Greens, all having to sit in the same room and agree the same policies, that's how much fun we have here, because we've got all sort of people sometimes put in different directions. So getting those in, and we don't have a government at the minute, so I can quite easily say this without getting my knuckles wrapped. But getting those departments together to actually understand that we all have a slight bit of the responsibility to deliver this, and also the benefits about it, it's really been key to us. And I think once we got people in the room and they realized what we were trying to do, and they realized they had a role to play, it's been a lot easier. One of the things we're also just looking at, and I won't sort of go too far, we've had a future look at the wireless landscape as well. So Northern Ireland, 5 to 15 years time, and we're trying to position ourselves something akin to what Sarah was talking about there in Scotland. That, you know, it's not just today, but you know, we'll look forward to what's happening coming down the line, because this stuff moves a lot quicker probably than any of us can imagine it, and it's getting quicker every time. You know, it's every time there's a new iteration or a new generation coming out, it seems to be like successor very, very quickly. So some of the things, again, that was more by fluke than design. We've commissioned this report, and we're looking forward. That's going to have, as part of one of the recommendations in it, that we're going to have a specific case study probably around something that everyone's emotive about, and that's, as we all know, health. And we're going to maybe try and look at a bespoke sort of solution around 5G, around health, which will demonstrate, you know, what this stuff can do, and then use that as the showcase for a lot of other things to sort of roll out that message from that point forward.
Sounds good. Yeah. So the education and communication bit is really going to be key. Sarah, I'm going to come to you.
I think it's taken industry 5 years to develop the technology and the standards and identify the use cases. So I think it's no surprise that, you know, businesses and local authorities are still in the catch up on that one. It's only now that we are properly seeing the real potential benefits. I think for 5G, the early buzzword was always efficiency. And I think that's still a real drive for both businesses and local authorities, and is really relevant, obviously, in the current financial climate. If I take, I suppose, on the local authority side, efficiencies, what does that look like? You know, removing the need for manual processing, moving services onto a platform so they're easy to access, that they're reliable and effective, and where I think to get that to a 5G level is still quite a challenge. What we need to do is actually still look at digital services and the application of connectivity to local authorities, and there's still a lot of groundwork again to be done on that. We've started to see that, or the recognition of that, through the Scottish Digital Strategy. Was published in 2021, and that was co-written by Scottish Government and COSLA, so all 32 local authorities working with Scottish Government. I think that was a really important piece for both central and local government, recognising the need to be a digital nation and the component parts to do that. And if we move, I suppose, slightly away from the infrastructure side, but again to the applications, it's really about developing those foundations for doing that. And one of them has been the Scot account. So it's like a public sector wide digital identity system. And it's being used to kind of create reusable and interchangeable digital components. So, you know, you're on that system and you've got a personality on there. And how does that interact with all the different services that the public sector provide? But that obviously then goes back to that trust word and kind of concern about how that's going to be used. And I think it's really interesting that the first pilot they've used of that Scot account has been with Disclosure Scotland. So the kind of the process that you go through if you need to engage with any children or vulnerable adults. And I think what they've done is go straight to a really an area where it's got very private, needs to be very secure, and they've been testing that out, and actually has been going to roll out to other areas with the rest of this year, and they've seen really success since they trialled it with Disclosure Scotland in February 2023. But what that's showing is all local authorities coming together, developing these common platforms, identifying these common issues that need to be solved, and then can be applied in different use cases in different areas. And I think that's the way that will not only gain efficiencies in how we develop it, but also how it's applied as well, and those outcome efficiencies as well. And I think we're again, fortunate in Scotland that we have a number of bodies that are doing that. So whether it's the local government digital office, we've got Scotland 5G Centre, we've got the Scottish Government Digital Directorate itself that's pulling a number of those elements together. And what it's doing is it's getting buy-in, it's getting strategic support within those organisations. It's linking up infrastructure and digital with need as well, which I think can also be some of the barriers. And it's starting to overcome some of the trust discussions because people can see the benefit. And I think that's sowing the seeds again for the 5G space, which I think will come on a public sector side, but there's a lot of groundwork to be done, particularly at a strategic and that kind of common platforms and common tools side.
Okay, good. Thanks, Sarah. Colin, you're from the local authority representative on here, and so but thinking about the role that the local authority can play, and helping aggregate demand and so on. What's your view on that one?
Yeah, I mean, we've got first-hand experience of this in a way, because it's exactly why we led a project that we did a couple of years ago called 5G Rural Dorset, and that was part of the government's 5G testbeds and trials program. And what it allowed us to understand, and hopefully, we won a few awards, but it was more for the communication, as much for the communication as it was for the delivery of what we did. I think it allowed us to clearly articulate to others the benefits of stacking 5G use cases in a very rural area like ours, but also how the infrastructure can be deployed in kind of different ways in very sensitive locations, and actually at lower cost than has traditionally been the case. So, we did some really exciting kind of technical innovation works and ran some use cases, sort of showing what the value and the benefits of 5G could be to a very sparsely populated area. So great, that was fantastic. The challenge, although, that we face now is how do we move to that adoption at scale in a location like the southwest of England? It's England's largest and most rural region. Really excited about, somebody's put it in the chat about the upcoming 5G Innovation Regions Initiative, which is outlined in the strategy. It's expensive to deliver services in rural areas, and we've got to find ways to aggregate demand across not only the public sector, but also the private sector, so that we can make the case for investment in the infrastructure. So for us as a local authority, that might be something as simple as making our land or assets available to those who want to deliver infrastructure, like we did in a recent project that we're involved in, or just making ourselves easier to deal with when the MNO comes knocking on the door and says, we want to build a mast here, and the first thought isn't, well, this is, we need to balance that the benefit that the connectivity provides with environmental and built heritage protection. So we've got to be better at that. Ultimately, though, I think someone else has put this in the chat, we might need to help the government make the business case for intervention where commercial investment won't come. So we've been living with these problems now for 30 years, and they're not going to be solved tomorrow. So national government, local councils, other government agencies, we've got a clear stake in delivering better connectivity. We've got to deliver better services in a more cost-effective way. If we're going to continue as the way we are, it's got to be sustainable. It's got to be fit for the future. And we're only going to deliver that by working collaboratively with industry. So that's what we've got to do. Yeah,
no, good. And I guess, as you're saying, it's you've done some great work there, and part of the testbed and trials piece, which got some funding, and it's just how can you take that and replicate it in other areas without potentially that lump of funding? Is a challenge, which I guess is what they're flagging in the strategy here, is about how we do that. Good stuff. Last kind of point I was maybe wanting to move on to is so the strategy talks, it's not just about 5G and 6G. It does make references to other technologies, recognizes that technologies such as Wi-Fi and the developments there are often what you need for a specific use case. It doesn't have to be 5G all the time, and also makes some reference to satellite quite a few times. So I'd be interested in your views on these other technologies. Adam, you mentioned what you're doing with LoRaWAN, but also satellite and things like the technology around satellite direct to device solutions to mobile phones. I mean, is that the answer to our coverage issues in rural areas? Is that realistic? So just to get your views around these other technologies and where they might fit. Maybe Adam, if we could maybe start with you and talk about those things.
Yeah, so I've already mentioned LoRaWAN, and
Yeah.
that's we're working with quite a few local authorities actually. It started out as footfall in town centres and things like that. And now it's on trees and in rivers and all sorts of places where we're using it as sensors, and that's great it works for LPWAN. Satellite, we've just worked with Vodafone and others for quite an innovative system summit based at South Stack, which is sort of like north-ish Wales, where we've backhauled a mobile unit using Starlink, and that mobile unit is from Wave Mobile, and it's got all 4 operators on it. So it was initially put there to monitor wildlife and to monitor an underwater energy generation system, but it's also providing connectivity in an area where there's no mobile connection. So that's providing emergency connectivity. And I understand it's already been used for a 999 call. Our ABC scheme, our Access Broadband Coverage Scheme, which funds broadband for people who can't get out of the way, we're starting to see an uptick in applications for us to fund Starlink. So Starlink's gaining in popularity, and we're keeping a watching eye on OneWeb and what that can mean for rural or even urban connectivity for that matter, but actually how that will land and what that will mean. Yeah, and then obviously looking at Wi-Fi 6 and how that can be used in industrial spaces and things like that. So it's getting the right technology, and it's not going actually 5G standalone is going to solve the world. It will solve part of the world, but there's other bits of the world that other things will solve that are maybe better. As for satellite to the device, be really interested to see how that develops, what that will mean, as in if it's a hand like a mobile phone, for instance, what's that mean for battery life, for latency, for all those other technical things that either make it work or it doesn't really work. If it works, and if it's reliable, and if it's at the right price point, and all those other things, then yeah, it's a possibility to solve rural mobile coverage, but it has to get all those ducks in a row first, and we're closer to that now. We've got LEO satellites than we were before. But yeah, it'd be interesting to keep an eye on that, because yeah, we do bang on about rural quite a bit, but that's where that's the bit where I think the government or local authorities or that will have a role to intervene. Urban areas probably largely take care of themselves to an extent, but it's those rural areas. So the satellite's looking promising, but it will depend on how that develops.
No, good, thanks. And Sarah, I suppose it's a bit coming to you about it's the connectivity that's required. It's not fixated on a particular technology like 5G. I think you were making that point earlier. How do you see this?
Yeah, I think that's right. We know satellite works. It's we know in our kind of patch that's being tested out in the Western Isles just now. So extreme conditions is being used in Forestry and Land Scotland as well. They're using it in again quite challenging geographies, but also with just some big trees in the way as well. So I think people know it. What we don't know is about the quality of that coverage yet. We don't know. I think the commercial model is still settling down. There's not the competition yet, with Starlink being the kind of sole distributor or sole provider of that just now. So I think when OneWeb comes on, that'll be interesting to see the impacts of that and the comparative, particularly on the quality side. So I think we're kind of cautiously optimistic about the potential, and as you say, the kind of competition from the non-terrestrial market, non-terrestrial networks, into the terrestrial networks as well, and what does that deliver? I think we've gotten used to historical kind of competitive consumer prices and that could be under threat, and it'll change the market. And to see how the rest of the market responds to that, I think is going to be, we've just not had that on our patch. We've seen, for example, fixed wireless access take off in America. That's not been something that's happened here, and I think this is going to fixed wireless access is something that was mentioned in the strategy as well, and that's another one that we can see coming. So it's not just from the sky. I think it's coming from many different spaces. But I think the key is going to be spectrum availability and how that all works. We're talking about rural areas, and that might make it more simple. But when you start clustering up the different technologies and the different spectrums being used, how does that all hang together? The other piece is, I think, the end user and the devices that they're going to be using as well. Anne talked about, well, for D2D, we're going to need certain types of handsets or tools to be able to use that. Well, what if we want to switch between those? Does that kind of lock people in? And again, it's about consumer knowledge and business knowledge as well, about what does that mean and what does it allow them to do, but when we cut them off. And I think, again, it'll come down to the market as to how do they respond. Do they come together, or do they stay separate in terms of preserving their own demand base and customer base for that? So I think there's, as I say, I'm cautiously optimistic with all the kind of caveats that we've still got to find out how it works in practice, but I think there's plenty more to come, and there is potential, and it'll be interesting to see how the market responds to that, and also the consumer, because if prices do go up, how do they value connectivity? We always say it's so important. Well, how do people actually value it? We're seeing that in households just now. People are switching off maybe their fibre provision because they're like, well, I can do what I need through my
handset.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's our first kind of those two areas coming together and people choosing between one over the other. So it comes down to what they want to do and how having the choice as to how they want to do it.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Eric. Colin, your view on this?
Oh yeah, so 5G Riddles, that we kind of experimented with some early capabilities to run remote cell sites backhauled over satellite. So we're dead interested in the technology. Direct handset, I think we've got to be careful. We can't just talk about getting someone connected. We've got to give them a decent experience, as Sarah said. So, if the wider goal of connectivity is to improve productivity and prosperity for everybody, we need to be sure that that's afforded to everybody in equal quality. We definitely don't want to reinforce that digital divide that already exists between rural and urban areas. I think if you think about satellite, data caps are more likely. £75 a month for a Starlink subscription, that's quite expensive and more than many people that I know could afford. So it's really interesting, I think, satellite for connecting some of our very remote places. But I think if we want to level up the UK's economy, provide the same opportunity for everybody, regardless of where they live, we've got to get fibre and fixed connectivity as far and wide as possible. I've been very supportive of the strategy. I'm going to be controversial. If I've got a criticism of the strategy, in the ministerial forwards, there's a sense that the job on fixed and fibre is done, and we can now turn our attention to 5G and 6G. It talks about gigabit coverage now standing at sort of 75%, I think, in the UK. In Dorset, in our bit of Dorset, gigabit coverage is 36%. The job isn't done. And areas like ours need investment in the same fibre that's going to enable 5G, Wi-Fi, and the other wireless technologies that we're talking about here. So, fibre is the core of everything here. Let's not forget that. So, in summary, I think satellite will help a few people, but let's get more people connected to fibre and make sure that rural and urban areas enjoy the same access to quality, resilient, fast connectivity at a good price.
Good points. Martin.
Yeah, I mean, we sit on the opposite side of the fence from Colin there. Unfortunately for us, unfortunately for him, our Project Stratum and then the successor Project Gigabit are pretty much going to hit nearly every property in Northern Ireland. There's still always sort of ridiculously hard to get properties, and we have islands here with small populations. But again, they're UK residents, so they're entitled to have this sort of service provided. So that's where the zone where we would look at sort of satellite stuff. It's almost the last mile type sort of stuff, where we're really struggling to find a financially acceptable solution. Undersea cables ridiculously expensive. So there may be alternative mechanisms there. On the whole thing, where I think somebody mentioned they're just briefly, and I totally agree with. These have to be complementary technologies, and one handset has to sort of pretty much cover all sort of services provided. And I don't think we want to get into the realms of compete. I know the market will look after itself, but I think we do have to have that, you know, it shouldn't be one or other. And I know Sarah, and I know plenty of people do it as well. They just turned off their broadband because they've got unlimited data and it's super cool and it's super fast. And then it maybe looks at, well, maybe it's not very attractive for some of the suppliers to provide that sort of stuff. So I think we have to be careful that we don't alienate or isolate some of the fixed brand stuff, which we know is essential, at the cost of delivering new technologies for new technology's sake. Specifically on the satellite stuff, again, I agree with other points there. I think the more this market's developed, the better it will become and the more competitive it will be. I think some of the prices at the minute are quite inhibitive, and it puts a real reluctance on people to use that. So some of the city deal stuff I'm involved in, the LoRaWAN stuff, the Wi-Fi 6 stuff, it's becoming very prevalent now because people are realizing that 5G maybe just isn't the answer. There are alternatives that you can use that better bespoke. So the LoRaWAN stuff for, you know, the footfall in towns, for refuge collection, for car parking, you know, or traffic movement, it's really becoming prevalent now, and that wasn't over here until very recently. So I'm glad to see that, but I do feel there's space for everything. And as I say, there's no point in designing other parts of the service out at the just for the thought that we want this new technology in. It can't replace it. It has to complement it, would be my opinion.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thanks, Martin. Good stuff. I'm just looking, we've only got 5 minutes to go. Time just whizzes by. I'm just looking at the chat. There's someone asking about coverage data, and there's quite a bit in the strategy around getting access to better data. And I guess you've probably all four of you have experience of trying to really understand, well, what data do I have and how does this fit with people on the ground and what they're seeing. Does anybody have any views about what needs to be done around that data element? And I mean, there's within the strategy, there's requests to Ofcom to look into how to better capture more accurate, more granular levels of data. Is that something which has been a real bugbear for some of you guys?
I just jump in really quickly. I think it's key that this data is really accurate, because we often, and I'll hark back to the Shared Road Network there, where we're saying Northern Ireland's going to have 98% geological coverage of PNS, so at least one of the operators going to be working here. And yet, if I look at my inbox on any given week, there's people coming from villages saying it's not here, it's not here. I'm looking at their coverage. I'm looking at, you know, where these people are saying that the service, and it doesn't exist. If I walk from one room to the other, or if I walk from one part of my back garden to the other, it doesn't exist. And it breeds then sort of skepticism, where people aren't going to believe what government are saying when we're trying to advance this stuff and trying to get people on board. It's really difficult, and I think it is something that, you know, bad data are sort of not pleasant. Data is better than bad data, in my opinion. You know, call it what it is. If it's poor, it's poor. If it's good, it's good. You know, but let's be realistic and accurate about it, because I think that going forward will really help. Well, one, identify where we need to focus some, maybe more of our funding, and two, maybe get the public and businesses on side with this.
I think for me, it's about strategy is also about who's going to get access to that data as well. That's the key. You can collate as much as you want, but if that's still sitting behind closed doors and under secrecy, and the people who are devising policy, making decisions, and also, as Martin's mentioned, they're dealing with issues that are arising, then that's not good to anybody. I think it goes back to what businesses and local authorities, what can they do with connectivity? Well, they need to know what it is. They need to know how good it is, or what they need to be engaging with industry to make it better, because they're you know, devising strategies and projects, etc. And if they don't, they can either assume connectivity is there or it will come, but that I think again is counterproductive, not value for money, and again goes back to that, takes a step back in people using digital connectivity as well, because they'll find a different way of doing it, which we've done all the way, and that's tried and tested, and that's okay. So I think for me, it's about getting access to that data and then it being kept frequent and up to date.
Yeah, I think we've been trying since the SRN started to find out where the SRN isn't going, because that's where we need to intervene, or we may consider intervening. that hasn't been forthcoming for sometimes understandable reasons, and they don't know yet. But as we're approaching the end of the project, we could do with knowing where they're not going, so we can understand that and plan interventions if we need to, or pull some of the other levers we have, or focus our barrier busting activity. There's a range of things we can do, and I think as Sarah alluded to, it's collecting data is fine. It's being able to access the data, and be able to access the right data is central to policy making, and it is quite difficult at the moment. But it is that's what we need. We need access to that data. So yeah, Ofcom have got data, and they provide us with access to their 100-meter square data, which is good. Which is so we know where Ofcom think everybody is at the moment, but if you're planning ahead, you need to know where they are and aren't going to be. Otherwise, you'll end up planning an intervention that isn't needed, and we don't want to spend public money on that.
And Colin, is that something that you've struggled with in Dorset?
I think we all struggle with access to high quality data about coverage. Asking the people who provide the coverage, the MNOs, for that data is always going to be problematic, because it's in their interest to show it's very good. We've done our own drive testing. We've got a strategic relationship with Ookla that looks at the end user's experience of trying to use the internet and access data, mobile data. It tells a very different story. So yeah, we're doing a lot on this, and I think it's a welcome development in the strategy that the government recognises that we need to have a better picture of both coverage and capacity, because there's no, I can think of several locations where I think I will have coverage, but if I actually try and do anything of any that requires any bandwidth, especially in the summer when our populations double or triple, you've got no chance. So yeah, it needs infill capacity. Yeah.
And in better indoor coverage too. Indoor data would be good too. Yeah. Excellent, folks. That's our time up. So thanks everybody for joining. Hope you found it useful. A special thanks, of course, to all the panelists taking part. Really interesting sessions. So Colin, Adam, Sarah, Martin, thanks to all of you. And just a reminder, we'll send out a link to the recording to everybody, and information on any future webinars, so you can keep up to date with it. So again, thanks everybody. It's been really good and a very quick hour. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.